All righty. So my presentation today is going to basically talk about something that probably many of you have heard of, and that is the Camino de Santiago, this ancient pilgrimage route that goes across the northern part of Spain. I had the opportunity to visit it this past May and June with a group of faculty. So we were studying the history, the art history, the culinary history, the economic history, and of course the religious history of the Camino. So it was an amazing journey. I'm actually going to take a group of students, if all works out, in May, and we're going to do a 2-week trip and walk part of the Camino, the last part, into Santiago. So I want to start with a little bit of history of the Camino. So St. James, as many of you probably are aware of, was the son. This is the Camino de Santiago, means the way of St. James. And there were 2 Jameses in the Gospels, 2 apostles of Jesus. One was called James the Greater, and one was called James the Lesser. This is James the Greater. He was the son of Zebedee, the brother of John, sometimes called the Sons of Thunder. I guess they were very zealous. He was part of Jesus' inner circle, according to tradition. He was present at the Transfiguration, along with Peter and John. And tradition states that he spent 2 years as the apostle to Spain. So he, according to tradition, and again, I don't want to get into a historical analysis of this, because sometimes legend and myth are mixed together. But tradition states that he spent 2 years in Spain as an apostle there. There was a miracle that took place in Zaragoza, Spain, where the Virgin Mary appeared to him from a pillar and told him that his mission would be an ultimate success and that Spain would become a Catholic country. There's a great cathedral now in Zaragoza that commemorates that, and it's also part of the Camino. Tradition then says that he was martyred in Palestine in 44, the Common Era, by Herod Agrippa, and that his body was then taken by boat to Spain. And the tradition says that, quote, guided by a star, led by an angel, the boat miraculously came to shore on the coast of Galicia. Now, Galicia is the farthest northwest province in Spain, and it's called Galicia because Visigoths settled that part of Spain. And so the people there have a different kind of culture than the rest of Spain. It reminded me a lot of Ireland. The music was very Celtic. There's a lot of people with blue eyes and blonde hair, or black hair and blue eyes, like in Ireland. The boat traveled, according to tradition, up the course of the river Ula, arriving at a place called Padrón. And the mooring stone that the boat arrived at is now located inside the church or the cathedral of Santiago on the main altar. The tradition also states that there was a pagan queen by the name of Lupa. She was convinced, she was of course trying to dissuade this whole thing because she was pagan, but she was convinced by miraculous deeds that took place to build a church to house the relics of St. James. So we fast forward to the 9th century, and all of this has kind of gone to ruin, and near the former resting place of the relics in a secluded wood, a marble sarcophagus is found, and it's believed that the relics inside the sarcophagus belong to James. So King Alfonso II houses them in a wooden church, which later is enlarged into a full cathedral. Monasteries are built around it. News spreads that these relics are now in this place in Santiago, and Santiago becomes a very popular pilgrimage site. One of the reasons for this is that it's the only pilgrimage site in Christendom west of Rome that actually has the relics of one of the apostles. So this is one of its claims to fame. Asturias, which is the state in which this is located, and Galicia become bastions of Catholic identity, and it's also the part of Spain that becomes the launching point for the reconquest of Spain from the Moors. So this becomes an extremely intensely nationalistic and nationalistically Catholic part of Spain from this point forward. And at this point then, for the next 1,000 years or so, Santiago becomes the most popular and important pilgrimage site in Christendom after Jerusalem and Rome. If you can't make it to Rome, if you can't make it to Jerusalem, you went to Santiago. So over the years, Santiago rises and falls in popularity, following political, economic, and religious change. It's during the Franco era that something very interesting happened. So this is between 1939 and 1975. Franco was a dictator, a fascist dictator, but he managed to hold on to power throughout all that time. And Camino festivals were used by the Franco regime to reinforce Spain's national identity, which at this time was at the bastion of true Orthodox Roman Catholicism. So it was a profoundly anti-modern and anti-democratic regime, and the Camino was used to buttress that, and the festivals and the pilgrimage itself were used to reinforce that idea. But following Franco's death in 1975, the Camino begins an entirely new era. And this is what I call the postmodern phase of the Camino. And now it's become interfaith. People from all different religious traditions come and walk the Camino. I met Muslims who were walking the Camino. And in addition, young people in Europe now consider it to be a rite of passage. It's their first trip away from home. They take the train down to Saint-Pierre de la Porte in southern France, and they walk the pilgrimage not for any religious reasons, but simply as a kind of first foray out into the world. They get to walk through beautiful landscape, sample all of Spain's great culinary delights, including its seafood, which is truly marvelous, and I'll get into that in just a second. And just meet all kinds of people from all over the world. So it's become a very much a kind of universal human pilgrimage that people engage in for all kinds of different reasons. Some of you have probably seen the film, The Way, starring Martin Sheen. Talks about a man who loses his son and goes on pilgrimage to celebrate his son's life, as his son dies actually on the pilgrimage. It's also become a powerful engine of economic growth in northern Spain. Obviously, when you have 500,000 to 1 million pilgrims walking the pilgrimage, every year you have a lot of services that those pilgrims need. So it's become a real engine of economic recovery there. And this picture here kind of gives you an idea of all the different routes that begin in France and then meet up. There are a number of different ways to get to Santiago. This is the route we took. It's called the French way, sometimes the Napoleonic way. And it goes, as you can see, across all these cities and sites all the way out to Santiago de Compostela. Santiago, by the way, means Saint James. Iago is another name for James. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the places that we visited on our journey. The first place we went to was Santo Domingo de la Calzada, and this was a beautiful little town that was built around a village where a guy named Domingo served pilgrims as they came through town, even built a bridge for them. And because of his efforts on behalf of these pilgrims, they turned him into a saint and built a cathedral there to him, where he's one of the main figures. But the thing that everybody likes about this church is the hen and rooster miracle. So the story goes that a German pilgrim and his parents were coming through the town, and while they were staying in an inn, a local girl fell in love with the young German man. But he refused her advances. And as a result of that, she took an expensive piece of jewelry and hid it in his luggage, and then reported him to the police. He was caught, he was tried, convicted as a felon, and he was hung in the town. And there you see him hanging. His parents, of course, were very upset about this. They went to Santiago, they prayed for him, and when they came back and were coming through the town, they noticed that their son was alive, hanging and alive, saying, "Please cut me down, I haven't died yet." So they cut him down, And they went to report this to one of the local magistrates, this guy here in black, and said, our son has been reconstituted, he's not dead. And the man said, that could no more happen than that the 2 chickens here on my table would turn into living chickens. And lo and behold, the chickens that he was about to eat turned back into living chickens. So to celebrate this great miracle, of course that verified the veracity of what they were saying, they built a part of the cathedral where they actually have 2 chickens. And there you see them, over to the right, to sort of remind people of this event that took place 400 or 500 years ago. So the hen and rooster miracle is what this church is known for. And of course, those of you who know something about the Catholic or the Orthodox Christian tradition know that they have a long tradition of relics. In every Catholic church, in the altar is buried a tiny little relic of a saint. The belief is that these relics had some kind of special healing power, healing virtue attached to them, so people would go on these pilgrimages just to touch the reliquary. This is technically a reliquary. It's a statue of a saint, and it's got part of his bone inside of there. So throughout the pilgrimage and all the churches that you go to, there are holy relics of various saints. And this is a skull. Can't make it up. There are a lot of skulls along the way. Now, one of the things that really stood out to me was all the different images of St. James. In every town and every church and every cathedral, and sometimes just out in the town square, you have these statues of St. James. The 2 poses that are most common are this one of St. James the Pilgrim, and you can see he's got a gourd and his walking stick, and the gourd, of course, has water or some other beverage inside of it, and you saw a lot of those. And then the other one is Matamoros, where he is the slayer of the Moors. So it's fascinating. He becomes this emblem of Spain's reconquest of Spain for Christianity against the Muslims. Now, these days, that's not a particularly happy tale to be telling, but it was striking as you go through all these churches, to all these images of St. James on a white horse slaying the Muslims. Spain has a fairly large Muslim population, and they have to sort of be very sensitive about how that's portrayed. This is another one of those images. And you can see that characteristic sort of cross that looks a little bit like a sword on his white flag, that red cross. That's the symbol of Santiago de Compostela. So many people that go there, they get a lighter or they get some kind of emblem or piece of jewelry that has that cross on it. This is another image of St. James as a pilgrim. Okay, the first major cathedral we stopped in was Burgos Cathedral. Beautiful, beautiful site. It's still a very active church. There are many side chapels around it. And there is a special door for the pilgrims. You can see the little red cross there. And pilgrims enter through this to get their stamp. Everybody who goes there has to have a stamp. By the way, could you pass me that? Yes, I need that. I need this prop a little bit later. I want to forget that. So pilgrims pass in here, and then they attend a pilgrim's mass. Most of the churches that you encounter along the way hold a service for pilgrims, usually around 6 or 7 at night. And this is one of those services inside this cathedral. And of course, inside this cathedral, you have another picture of St. James slaying the Muslims. But probably the most remarkable historical thing about this cathedral in Burgos is the tomb of El Cid. El Cid was a great commander who won some important battles in the reconquest of Spain against the Moors. And some of you are old enough to have seen the movie El Cid, was starring Charlton Heston, and this is his burial place. His actual name was Rodrigo. Now, the next city that we went to, the next large city on the Camino, is called León. It was the capital of the Kingdom of León. And this gentleman here is part of a group that they're called the Hospitalers, and they take 2 to 4 weeks every year, and they go to one of the hostels along the Camino, and they serve the people who come to the hostels. They should serve them 2 meals a day. They take care of the bedding and beds. They keep everything clean. And this guy here is wearing the traditional pilgrim's garb. They had me dress up in it too, but I want to spare you any sort of trauma that might come about from seeing me in this costume, so I used him. You can also see the shell there on his hat, and a little bit of that red cross there. Anybody who's walking the Camino has a shell, either on their backpack or they're wearing it. This scallop shell, that's the main symbol. But these guys were great. We had several presentations, and you could tell that their hearts were just all about hospitality and taking care of people who were walking the pilgrimage. Of course, it's much less dangerous now than it used to be. It used to be a fairly dangerous route. There were robbers and all kinds of things that could happen to you. Now it's perfectly safe. I wouldn't take students. In fact, didn't think it was safe. This is Leon Cathedral at night. Beautiful, beautiful edifice. And this was a very pleasant surprise. It's connected to the cathedral, but it's actually a convent, and they have a museum. And inside that museum are all kinds of jewels and sculptures and paintings that are of historical value. But in one room there was actually, it was just the only thing in the room. It was kind of a dark room, and inside this big glass case was a chalice made of agate, a bottom and a top, and then some filigree that had been put around it later. And the story that was told, of course, as you know, there are many claimants to the Holy Grail. Many people claim that they have the Holy Grail, or that they have a traditional cup from that early Roman period. But this one, of all the ones that I've seen, actually had the most historical evidence to support it. It actually had papers attesting to its validity that went all the way back to the 4th century. And it had been given to various Christian kings. Then it had fallen into Muslim hands, and finally it was given by a Muslim king to a Spanish king because of some kind of service that was rendered in Spain. So this one actually had, some kind of historical pedigree. And the actual cup itself, the agate cup, was very much characteristic of that period during which Christ lived. So I thought it was really interesting. It was a beautiful, beautiful cup. Okay, then this was the halfway mark for those who start in Spain across the Pyrenees, a place called Sahagún. You have some beautiful architecture there that is connected to Moorish architecture. And this is the little place that says that you have made it halfway. There's actually a map just above it, that you are halfway on that path. Okay, at this point, we actually got to walk. And this is our merry band, and you can see that mile marker. These help you never to get lost. There are many, many of these shells and many of these markers. They tell you exactly how many kilometers you still have to go to get to Santiago, but you can't miss them. And there are many of them along the Camino. And at the very end of my talk, I'll show you the final one. Okay, this is probably the most difficult thing that happens. It happened to me. And I was wearing hiking boots that I had used and tromped all over Europe with, because I do research on megalithic sites. And I walked over many a mile of Western Europe. I never had any problem with these boots, and the second day out I had blisters. And those of you who know, when you get blisters on your feet, it makes walking very uncomfortable, especially if you've got to walk 26 kilometers a day. So this is just one example. You saw people all along the way nursing their blisters. This was out in front of Burgos Cathedral, 2 Australian women that were showing telling me their war stories. Fortunately, the Spanish guide who was with us was an expert at triage on blistered feet, so he was able to bandage us up and keep us going. And ultimately, I just wore sandals. That was the best solution. I had a really good pair of sandals, and that's what I wore, because boots just didn't work for me. So these are some of the various signposts you see. This one is actually in the ground in front of a church. that symbol of the scallop, so you know you're on the right path. And here's some cyclists who you can also cycle the Camino, and they're sort of looking at that particular signpost. There's, of course, hostels for pilgrims to stay at along the way. Some of them are nicer than others. Some of them you're in a room, it's like a dormitory with 100 other people, so it can be a bit noisy. And you can see that it's a hostel because of the big scallop shell there. Some of the signposts, when you get into Galicia, are actually really old ones. This is one from the early part of the 20th century. It says Ruta Zulia, and that's actually in the Galician language, which is not Spanish, it's not Portuguese, it's not Latin, it's a mixture of all kinds of different things. But Ruta is route. And you can see the older style of scallop there. Some more signposts. As you get closer to Santiago, the signposts get a lot more ornate. And this was a very nice one. Some people put this up on their farmhouse. It's really hard to get lost. It is possible if you're not paying attention, but this pathway goes through little villages and fields and lanes, and as long as you're paying attention, there are always these signposts. So pilgrims oftentimes carry these backpacks, and you can see that there's a white shell attached to each of them. I'm not sure where people get these. We got them from the Hospitalers when we started our journey, but people always have these, and it marks you off as a pilgrim. And this little girl was carrying her dog. I'm not sure what he thought of the whole thing. One of the wonderful things about walking the Camino, if you've done any reading on this or seen any of the films, is just the fellowship. You meet all kinds of really interesting people from all over the world. And everybody gets into this spirit of mutual service. So whatever your need is, if you're hungry, somebody shows up and gives you some food. If you have an injury, they either dress it themselves or they take you to a local doctor or hospital. If you need a place to stay, somebody will appear and give you a bed to sleep in a place. This was the really remarkable thing that I found. I mean, everybody talks about the transformation that takes place when you walk the Camino. And for me, that transformation, when it happens, is because of the mutual assistance, the mutual service and kindness that people show to each other, regardless of your religious beliefs, your national identity, your ethnic identity. Everybody just gets into this space where you're taking care of everybody around you. And I think people are really touched by that. They're really moved by that. They think that's the way I should be living, every day with my neighbors, with the people in the town, the place I work. That's the way we should be living with each other. And I think they get a real sense of what that could be like. Here we are having some really good octopus. Now this is another thing that pilgrims do. This was at a little hostel in this beautiful little town. It had a river and an old bridge. And we were so happy to find a cold running stream to put our poor tired feet into. This is a very common thing. You'll have people asking taxis, local taxis, about various routes. And this was a guy who just kept showing up sort of like a bad penny along the way. And at first, I just thought he was like a panhandler, so you give him a little money and wish him well. But he just kept showing up everywhere we went, so we sort of became friends with him. And he had a wonderful story. He was from Madagascar, the island of Madagascar, and he was actually on his way to Fatima, one of the Marian apparition sites in Portugal, and somehow he got misdirected onto the Camino, so he was walking the Camino, and he was a wonderful guy, a very loving person. So if you ever go on the Camino, this is my tip, stop in Melilla, because they have this amazing restaurant that's open most of the day that has the most incredible octopus you have ever eaten. It is really good. I know octopus doesn't sound very appetizing to Americans.
It looks like a pie.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's these big chunks of octopus that have been cooked in a special way, and they're just tender as butter. Really delicious. That was the best meal we had. And there's some of the preparation. You can see they're cooking the octopus there, and they got a guy over there on the side. He's got this big pot, and they're boiling it. They also have the best scallops in the world in Spain. They're a little smaller than our scallops here, but the way they prepare them, the garlic butter and all the different spices they use, really amazing. I mean, I like seafood. I'm basically vegetarian or pescatarian, but I like good seafood. And this seafood in Spain was always fresh. It was like caught that day. But this is another lovely little town along the way called Samos. This was actually the view from my hotel room. See the beautiful little bridge there with the scallop shells, little river running past it. This is the monastery and monastery church in Samos. The next place we stopped was a Knights Templar castle. The Knights Templars were quite prolific in Spain and Portugal, and they set up all of these castles there, and this is one that's almost completely intact. My first piece of academic research when I went back to school was on the Knights Templar, so I was very excited to stop at this Templar castle. You're all familiar with the Knights Templars. It was a monastic order that came about just about at the beginning of the First Crusade, and the idea was to keep pilgrims safe as they were making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem from bandits and other people who would do them harm. So you had this group of knight monks who basically protected the pilgrims as they made their way. Then they became a very powerful institution, a banking institution, and became a little bit too powerful in Europe, and ultimately were suppressed by the monarchy of France and also the Catholic Church. But some of their castles still exist. And that's the familiar Templar symbol, that T there. You always see that emblem above a Templar building. So, unfortunately, when we came into Santiago itself, the cathedral was undergoing renovation, so there was all this scaffolding in front. So I wanted to give you a sense of the cathedral, which is magnificent in Santiago, the place where all the pilgrims are going to. This is what it looks like, and obviously this is a model. If you are very, very tired and your blisters are bad, you can get a little train that takes you around the town. Now, one of the wonderful things about this trip was that we were given a tour of the roof of the cathedral. So we actually got to go up on the roof and look at the city from up there. And this is one of the views that we had. That's actually a cloister, that area that's just immediately off where you can see the arches. It's a beautiful cloister down there. And this is the image of St. James on top of the cathedral. And you can see it's St. James as the pilgrim. This is another, from another side of the cathedral. That image in the middle is St. James as the pilgrim with the traditional hat. This is a side chapel. They have a pilgrim's mass every day at noon, where they swing this huge incenser back and forth. They actually have to have several people with ropes pulling it back and forth, and it swings the whole transept from side to side. It's quite dramatic. This is the image of St. James in the cathedral, and if you see something, that's something that sort of sticks out to you when you look at that image? What's the thing you notice around the outside? See the hands around the neck? People can actually walk up behind this and hug St. James. So those are actually live hands of someone who's hugging St. James from behind. This is a little bit closer picture, and you can see that little hand there, off to the left. Okay, so this is the Pilgrim's Mass. It's out in front of the main altar. And it's called the Bota Fumero, and it's this huge incenser. And then you can see the rope that it hangs on, and then they sort of light it, and then they move it back and forth. And that lasts about 10 minutes or so, but it's kind of the dramatic height or crescendo of the service. This is actually the reliquary that contains the bones, supposedly, of St. James the Apostle. So this is in an underground crypt underneath the main altar, and everybody goes there and kneels down and says a prayer. Again, if you weren't raised in the Catholic or the Orthodox tradition, all of this must seem very bizarre to you, but in the Catholic tradition, relics are very, very important. This is just another view from the roof. Some pilgrims down there. All of these are hostels that people stay at, and of course there are monasteries and seminaries also. This was kind of my favorite thing that I saw up on the roof, and that's Father Time, Chronos, underneath the clock. And this is just one of the entrances, various statues. Okay, so now it's time for my prop. Everybody goes to Santiago, you get a little card that you get stamps on. So everywhere you go along the Camino, they stamp your car. It's like a passport. And if you have enough of those, and it shows that you've walked at least 100 kilometers, you can get a plenary indulgence. Now, that's a big deal if you're a Catholic, because these are Catholics who are burning in the fires of purgatory. It's not hell. It's temporary, but it's still very painful. So this was a reminder. It's on this church here. You can see the entrance to the church. This is a reminder of why you need to go on the pilgrimage, because the Pope has declared many, many years ago, that if you make the pilgrimage to Santiago, you will receive a plenary indulgence, which means that all of the time that you were supposed to spend in the purgatory prison has been completely wiped away. It's like a general pardon of all of your sins. And as you can see, I got mine. They printed these out and gave us an official document that says that we have completed the pilgrimage and had our sins wiped away.
Does the devil know that?
You just have to believe. But again, in traditional Catholicism, they took this very seriously, and of course, if you're part of the Reformation or the Reformation tradition, you know that Martin Luther, this was one of the things that he railed against, because it was obviously abused in some ways. He didn't like the idea that you could purchase your way to heaven.
Right.
But at any rate, this is part of this tradition, and this was a little tableau meant to remind people of why they were making the pilgrimage. Now, these two guys were a couple of Galician singers, and I chatted with them, and they were out selling their CD and playing a little music, traditional Galician music. And I'm making a documentary on this, so I needed a soundtrack. So he and I, this guy over on the left here, holding the bowl, he and I went off to a cafe, and I bought him a cup of coffee, and we chatted, and on a piece of paper that the local barkeeper gave us, he signed away his rights to allow me to use the soundtrack, to allow me to use the music on the CD as the soundtrack for my documentary. He was just happy. I said, oh, that's fine if you want to use it. I told him it's for educational purposes. I don't sell it, I just make it available to educators. Okay, then at the very end of the pilgrimage, some people will go it's about another 30 miles or so to the coast itself, a place called Finisterre, which means in Latin the end of the world. And I'm standing there in front of the marker with the guy on my right is Paco, who was our handler, the person who took care of us. I called him our Spanish bodhisattva, because he just took care of everybody's needs. And then the guy on my left was Javier, and he was our driver. And some of the driving's a little hairy, and he did a great job. And there you can see the final mile marker is 0.00 kilometers. If you've ever been down to Key West, you know there's the end of Highway 1. And pilgrims here oftentimes will sit and contemplate the end, the great ocean that lays beyond, the Atlantic Ocean, and sometimes they will actually burn their shoes or their hiking boots. They'll have a little fire, and of course, back in the day, you've been walking in these clothes for 3 months, and it was time to burn the clothes. So some people will actually burn their clothes at this point too, and it's part of the sort of death and rebirth that happens on pilgrimage. I just gave my boots away. I'm too practical to sort of burn good boots, but I just gave them to a guy who needed them. And that's me kind of contemplating the end of the way. It was a wonderful experience. I would highly recommend it if you're of sound body. It is a little bit taxing depending upon how much you're walking every day, but just wonderful, wonderful people, wonderful spirit. There's incredible art history if you're interested in art history. These cathedrals are beautiful. The people are very friendly, very helpful. It's a great way to see Spain, and a great way to learn something about Spanish religion and history, walking the Camino. So I'll be happy to continue talking about it during our little session, but that's the end of my presentation.